One old Ukrainian MiG-29 lifts off in the dark with a simple order that sounds almost impossible. Fly low, slip under Russia's air defenses, and hit an ammo depot and command post near Orikhiv that feeds an entire axis of attack. On the map, it is just one jet and one target, but in the air, it becomes a duel against the most dangerous air defense network Russia can build, stacked with long-range missiles, hidden ambushes, and a fighter waiting to finish the job. For the pilot, this mission is not about glory or a perfect plan. It is about staying alive for a few more seconds at a time while the sky fills with threats from every direction. Modern war is supposed to be ruled by sensors, computers, and clean missile trajectories. Yet this flight turns into something very different, because one human in a worn airframe keeps forcing that system to recalculate. Tonight's report will walk through that mission step by step, from the first radar warning tone to the last seconds over the runway, and ask what it really means when a single strike can shake an entire offensive. Stay with Military Force, hit like, share this video, and subscribe so you do not miss how this story unfolds. The story of this mission enters its real danger phase when the MiG-29 leaves the relative safety of Ukrainian airspace and starts its run toward the Russian rear. The fighter drops down to treetop level, following rivers, fields, and low ground to hide inside the clutter that enemy radars see as background. At this height, every small hill and forest line becomes a shield that can bend or block radar waves long enough for the jet to slip through. The pilot flies by instruments and training, not by comfort, because one small mistake in pitch or bank angle at this speed could send the aircraft into the ground. For several minutes, the route stays quiet, which is often the most dangerous feeling in a combat flight, because it can tempt crews to believe that the enemy is not watching. That false calm does not last long, because the profile of the mission forces a change that the pilot cannot avoid. As the MiG closes on the target area near Orikhiv, the pilot has to start climbing so the bombs can glide far enough to reach the ammo storage and command buildings. Smart weapons like the GBU-39 need a certain height and speed to open their wings and ride a long path through the air, which means the launch platform must rise above its earlier cover. The nose comes up, the altimeter starts to spin, and the protective mask of terrain slowly falls away, exposing the jet to sensors that scan far beyond the front line. In that short climb, the aircraft moves from the shadow world of low-level flying into the bright circle where high-power radars wait for exactly this kind of target. And that is the moment when the first layer of Russia's deep air defense reaches out from the distance. Near Melitopol, a Russian S-400 battery watches the sector with powerful search and engagement radars that cover hundreds of kilometers in every direction. As the MiG-29 gains height, its radar cross-section becomes easier to pick out from the noise, and the system's computers mark it as a fast, hostile track closing from the Ukrainian side. Operators confirm the course, altitude, and speed on their screens, and once the rules of engagement are satisfied, the order goes out to fire. A long-range interceptor leaves its launcher in a blast of flame, climbing fast and bending onto an intercept curve calculated to meet the fighter in the sky long before it reaches its release point. For the crew on the ground, this looks like a clean engagement because the geometry gives the missile plenty of time and energy to complete its task. This is how a strategic surface-to-air system is supposed to work when an attacking jet is forced to climb into view. The S-400 is designed to hit aircraft, cruise missiles, and even some ballistic targets before they can influence the battle on the ground. And that design logic now points straight at one Ukrainian pilot. It combines strong radars, fast computers, and high-speed interceptors into a single chain that aims to remove threats at long distance, often before crews ever see the launch. In this case, the system has done its part correctly, and the only thing left between the interceptor and the MiG is whatever the pilot can still do with his own hands. Russian air defense does not give up when one missile fails, because the system is built to adapt and keep hunting the same target from a different angle. After the first long-range shot misses, the crew on the ground switch their main radar to a split layout, where the transmitter stays at the original site and a separate receiver sits many miles away. This bistatic setup lets the wave leave from one location and return to another, so the network can catch reflections that would normally slide under a single radar beam. From the cockpit, the Ukrainian pilot feels safer after dropping back toward low level, yet the energy bouncing off his MiG still travels outward like a moving mirror in the sky. He believes the horizon is hiding him, but the geometry has changed, and a different set of eyes is now watching the same flight path from a fresh direction, which is exactly what opens the door for a more focused ambush. The second stage of this chase shows how a modern air defense grid behaves less like individual units and more like one shared organism. The S-400 complex does not simply forget a contact when guidance breaks. Instead, it keeps the last known position, heading, and estimated speed inside its computers. Those figures form a track file, and that file can be pushed across cables and radio links to other launch units that cover different ranges and heights. In this sector, the handoff goes to a Buk M3 battery that has already been placed along a likely escape route, so the crew does not need to search a wide area for a single fighter. The network treats the MiG as a moving problem that can be passed from one weapon to another, and this mindset is what turns a single failed engagement into a planned kill zone further along the pilot's route. The choice of ground where the Buk team waits is not random, because human habit plays a role here as well. Russian planners know from earlier flights and patterns that Ukrainian crews prefer a particular valley, since its slopes and tree lines give strong cover from direct observation. Low terrain like that blocks many radar beams, so it becomes a natural tunnel for returning jets that are short on fuel and trying to avoid attention. By studying previous missions, the defenders can guess that any fighter escaping from this part of the front will slide through the same gap again, especially when stress and fatigue push the pilot toward familiar ground. The ambush is built around that expectation, which means the Buk battery does not need to roam or improvise once the incoming track is confirmed by the wider air defense picture. When the MiG finally reaches the mouth of this valley, the Buk M3 unit stops hiding and starts to work through its own attack sequence. Its target acquisition radar has been silent to avoid warning the jet too early, but it is already pointed toward the narrow corridor where the aircraft must appear. At the chosen second, the crew energizes the antenna, and a beam snaps out to meet the fighter just as it climbs past the terrain mask. On the pilot's threat display, fresh symbols bloom instantly, showing that a new fire control radar has locked on at close range, and that escape options have shrunk to a small box between ground and sky. This is the moment when the danger shifts from a distant strategic system to a medium-range weapon waiting almost directly in front of the jet, and that change in distance will decide how much time he has left to fight. The engagement with the Buk M3 turns brutal the moment two 9 M317M missiles leap from their launch rails and curve toward the trapped fighter in the valley. Each interceptor climbs hard, pulling heavy G as it bends onto a path that closes the distance in seconds, while the Ukrainian pilot feels his warning system scream at him from the cockpit panels. He throws the MiG into a violent barrel roll, rolls through the sky, and yanks the stick across his body so the jet keeps changing aspect faster than the fire control computer expects. At the same time, he punches out chaff in tight bursts, building a shifting cloud of metal strips that twist behind the jet and break up the clean line that the tracking radar is trying to hold. The aircraft skims close to the slopes as he uses every meter of the valley to mask his moves, because any extra altitude would turn him into a perfect mark. One missile flashes past at close range, unable to follow the sudden roll rate, and the second warhead detonates behind him after losing the exact intercept point. The first salvo has been defeated, but the price is high because the fighter has burned precious fuel, lost airspeed, and pushed both the airframe and the pilot's body close to their limits, which sets up a far more painful choice in the next moments. While the pilot fights to steady his jet, the Buk crew on the ground works through a reload drill that they have practiced again and again in training fields far from the front. The transport vehicle swings fresh missiles onto the launcher with a crane, and the crew locks each round into place with quick, practiced movements that keep the system dangerous even after a full engagement. Modern Buk variants are designed to restore their firepower fast, because any pause in coverage can open a window that enemy aircraft might try to exploit. In the sky above this particular valley, there is no spare energy for the Ukrainian pilot to waste, yet the mission still demands that he reach a height where his precision weapons can glide. The GBU-39 needs a solid launch speed and a clean climb to spread its wings and travel the distance to the ammo depot and command post that anchor the Russian attack in this sector. If he stays low to save himself, the bombs will fall short and the strike will fail. But if he climbs into thinner air, he will step back into the center of the engagement envelope for the book battery. A combat pilot in that position is not being asked to pick between safety and danger. He is choosing between two different types of risk, and he decides that finishing the mission is the only answer that gives the sacrifice any meaning. By the time the MiG starts its climb toward release altitude, the launcher is ready again, and the book commander chooses to fire a second pair of 9 M317M almost at the same instant. Both missiles leave the rails in a tight interval, which feels aggressive from the ground, but also means they will arrive near the target within the same small slice of time instead of in two separate waves. For the pilot, that detail turns into a thin advantage because he now faces one concentrated defensive problem instead of a staggered trap that would keep him pinned in the sky. He holds his course for a few long seconds while the GBU-39s update their guidance systems, lock their position, and prepare for a release that will let them fly on without further help. When the weapons are ready, he squeezes the trigger and feels the jet jump slightly as the bombs drop away, freeing weight from the wings and committing the strike to its own path. The Ukrainian jet escapes the second salvo, with its weapons on the way and its structure still intact. Yet it does so at the cost of almost all spare energy and fuel, which leaves it slow and exposed for whatever asset the Russian network sends into the fight afterward. The arrival of the Su-35S turns a hard mission into something even more unbalanced, because the Ukrainian jet is already slow and low on fuel when the fighter is called in. Russian controllers use their radar picture to steer the Su-35S toward the MiG's general area, giving the pilot a clear idea of where a tired target is dragging itself toward friendly lines. High above the front, the Su-35S can climb, accelerate, and choose the best altitude for missile shots, while the MiG has almost no room left to trade speed for maneuver. This is the point where the danger changes from fixed launch sites on the ground to a manned interceptor that can keep adjusting its approach in real time. The Ukrainian pilot now faces an opponent that can hunt across the sky, not just guard a small patch of terrain, and that shift in threat makes the coming missile shot very different from what he has already survived. So the first attack comes from far beyond what the human eye can see. When the Su-35S closes to a comfortable distance, the Russian pilot chooses an R-77, a radar-guided weapon built for beyond visual range kills. The missile drops from its rail and lights its motor, pushing forward at several times the speed of sound, while data from the fighter's radar and link help it shape a clean intercept path. The MiG climbs to a steep angle, slows toward the edge of controlled flight, and finally tips into a stall where lift disappears and the jet starts to fall. Guidance software in the R-77 has been built to predict where a moving aircraft will be in the future, not to chase an object that suddenly hangs in the air like a stone. The calculations that worked a moment ago no longer match reality, and the missile flashes through the space where the MiG would have been if it had kept flying in a normal pattern. The R-73 leaves the wing with a sharp kick, its sensor staring straight at the hot plume from the MiG's engine, which makes the incoming threat even harder to sense until it is already close. The Ukrainian pilot knows that radar tricks and chaff will not help against a heat seeker, so he builds a different kind of shield by pitching the nose up again and firing flares in a thick, rising pattern. Each flare burns at extreme temperature and throws off a strong infrared signal, and together they form a wall of false targets that try to pull the missile away from the real jet. Fuel limits on the Russian side now start to press, because long periods at high power and repeated maneuvers eat into the margin needed to get home, and that reality narrows the time window for another clean shot. The brief gap created by the failed close-range attack and the fighter's own fuel concerns gives the Ukrainian pilot a narrow chance to turn back toward his own airspace, which sets up the final phase of this escape as he drops low again and heads for the last threats waiting near the front line. As the MiG skims toward Ukrainian airspace at very low level, the last trap waits not in the sky but in a tree line ahead. A ZSU-23-4 Shilka opens fire from cover beside the flight path, its four 23mm guns throwing a solid stream of tracers across the route like a glowing fence. The pilot has almost no warning, so he rolls the jet upside down and hauls it down toward the fields, flying with negative G so the aircraft hangs from its belts and passes under the curtain of rounds. Shells crack past the canopy and some punch through metal at the rear, yet the fighter manages to squeeze through the engagement zone with only a few meters between its wings and the ground. That brutal inverted dive turns the MiG into a knife blade running along the surface, and it shows how low-altitude survival at the end of a mission can be just as deadly as any missile shot earlier in the day. Yet even that violent pass is only part of how this return leg changes the battle. The bursts from the Shilka do real damage to the airframe, because hits near the tail and in the hydraulic system strip away much of the smooth response that a fighter usually gives its pilot. Warning lights spread across the cockpit, fluid leaks start, and the control stick begins to feel heavy and rough, as if every input must fight through sand. Fuel is almost gone after the long route and the hard maneuvers, so the pilot no longer has the option to climb, circle, or search for a perfect runway. He aims for the first forward strip within reach, accepts that the landing will be crude, and focuses only on keeping the jet stable enough to touch wheels onto concrete. While he fights the controls to stay airborne, his bombs are closing in on the real target set for this operation. Far behind the damaged MiG, the two GBU-39s continue their glide on silent wings, using inertial guidance and satellite updates to stay on course through electronic interference. The first weapon locks onto the battalion command post, reads the heat pattern of the main building against cooler surroundings, and dives through the roof before exploding in the center of the operations hub. Radios, maps, and staff officers vanish in a fraction of a second, cutting the nerve center that was directing hundreds of troops and dozens of guns along that axis of advance. The second bomb burrows into an ammunition dump packed with artillery shells and rockets, and its blast triggers a chain reaction that turns the bunker into a massive fireball and throws debris across the entire site. When the shockwave fades, the depot and command node are gone. The local offensive has lost both its brain and its ammunition, and a single strike package has punched a hole in Russia's ground campaign that no Shilka can repair on its own. This is the moment when a single risky sortie by an old MiG shows how air power can cripple a whole attack line and leads straight into the larger question of what this kind of mission means for the future of the war. The last image of this mission is not the fireball over Orikhiv, but a broken jet rolling to a stop. The MiG sits on the forward strip with torn skin and burned paint, yet its canopy opens and a single pilot climbs down on shaking legs. Behind that damaged airframe stands a silent fact, because the command post and ammo hub that once fed a Russian push on this sector no longer exist. This will shape how every major power thinks about fighters, ground-based missiles, and lone crews flying straight into the heart of a sensor web. The hard question is how many more Ukrainian pilots and airframes can carry that load, and how fast Russian planners can patch the gaps that this kind of mission exposes inside their air defense network. It also shows how much value now rests on precise munitions, low-level routes, and crews who understand every trick that keeps them alive long enough to release their weapons. This is what a successful deep strike really means in modern war, since one sortie that survives layered defenses can still cut nerves, drain shells, and freeze an entire axis of advance. If you want more clear reports on real missions, modern weapons, and the politics behind them, remember to like this video, share it, and subscribe to Military Force so you do not miss the next frontline story.